Welcome into the Living Room Disciple podcast. Today, Phil and I are having a conversation based on a question sent in by Anna, who asked us to have a discussion about an article from the Gospel Coalition on gentle parenting. So today we're asking, is gentle parenting biblical? How are our children formed by the way that we approach them, the way we treat them? How should we think about our children as human beings? And what is the role of punishment in parenting? It's a great conversation, and we're so glad you are along for the ride with us today. If you want to support the work we're doing around here, visit livingroomdisciple.com, where you can find out more about us and support us on Patreon. And as always, we are so grateful that you have chosen to listen to the Living Room Disciple podcast, where discipleship finds a home.
Nick, I'm really excited because I have no idea what you're going to say.
Yeah, this is a unique episode.
Yeah, our very first episode that was like based on a question submitted from a user. So shout out to Anna. Thank you so much for going to our website, livingroomdisciple.com, and contacted. Absolutely shameless. And she asked if we wouldn't mind reading a particular article from the Gospel Coalition on gentle parenting, linked in the show notes below, and kind of given our hot takes on it. And we haven't talked about this at all.
No, I have no idea what you're about to say.
All right, so we ready to bash the Gospel Coalition?
Well,
maybe not. Maybe not.
We'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Okay, so not only did I read the article, so I read the article. And it began with this phrase. It was like, if you've paid attention to parents with young children in recent years, you've observed something, and then kind of gives a scenario that I kind of really maybe haven't observed as much in our Southern culture. But I made a bunch of references to this gentle parenting TikTok trend. And as longtime listeners will know, I'm not very familiar with TikTok and social media. So I went to YouTube and I looked up TikTok compilations, and I think I started to paint a picture of what gentle parenting is. Is this something you're more familiar with? Like, have you kept up with this over the years, Nick?
Yeah, I am on social media more than Phil, probably too much. And as a parent of a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, I've definitely seen the gentle parenting stuff out there, and honestly learned a lot of really helpful things. I don't know if my wife and I would describe ourselves as gentle parents or whatever, but there are. And even in the article, it describes some helpful tips and things that you can pick up, even though the article is pretty explicitly bashing gentle parenting. But yeah, we've learned some really good nuggets of truth.
Well, let's take a step back before we dive into the article and what we think. So, and I think the article does a decent job of explaining it. And from here on out, I'm going to stop saying the article. Anyways, what is gentle parenting? So, I guess, Nick, What's your definition of it? And then I'll try to give my own thoughts.
Yeah. So I would say it is parenting that is focused less on the outcomes in terms of behavior, like plug in A and receive B, plug in spanking or whatever it is, receive good behavior or obedience. And it's more tuned into let's attune ourselves as parents to our child's emotional state and the state of their body's regulation and all the kind of things that go into why is the kid acting this way, not just we need to make them stop acting this way. So I think the general idea is let's make sure our kids first and foremost know that they are loved by us, that they are safe with us, that they are taken care of, that we care how they're feeling. And so it can, I think part of what the article is addressing is it can quickly push into permissive parenting, which is not the same thing as gentle parenting, but yeah, I think there can be a through line there where it can quickly become just, oh, you're feeling sad, you can have the cookies. But I think the premise of gentle parenting is set the boundaries, but then be there for your child when they're sad about the boundaries, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, I have definitely a similar perspective. What listeners may not know is, so my background is in education. I have my master's in education. And so a part of that, although I focus mostly on older, adolescents, there's still just general child development that's kind of intertwined throughout my education. And so this is, I think, one of those many topics that rose to my attention. And I had this moment of like, do people think this is new? Like, is this like,
Right,
is it because it's trendy? You know what I mean? Like when
Yeah.
critical race theory kind of like made all the headlines, and we're like, this has been a prominent theory in the academic world since the 70s and 80s.
Right.
I don't know why it's like trending now. You know what I mean? So I definitely had one of those moments, and it's maybe I think a better way of phrasing it versus gentle parenting would almost be emotionally aware parenting or emotionally intelligent parenting, and it's parenting that leans into tactics that are in tune with your own emotional state as a parent and then the child's emotional state, and making parenting decisions based upon that. And I do think you brought up a good point. Generally speaking, there's kind of like this really extreme spectrum where on one side you have permissive parenting, where it's essentially child-led. The child makes the decisions.
Right.
And then I don't remember the name. I think it's called authoritarian, but they might have a different frame.
Yeah.
A name. Parenting where the parent makes all the decisions, essentially absent of the child's wants, needs, desires, or anything like that. And I think gentle parenting, from what I saw online from researchers and educated individuals who are posting on social media, at least what I found, because there's, I think, a lot of people who have no idea what they're talking about. There's like a through line, right? It's essentially saying like, how do we have a parent-led parenting style, but the parent leads in a way that's focused in on the child's well-being, what the child needs ultimately, not what they want in the moment, but what they need ultimately. And yeah, I mean, there's definitely some good examples of that. I think throughout the article, but also I think just in life in general. I mean, you have really young kids, and so gentle parenting might be when you realize that you're, for me, I have this 18-month-old Henry, and when he's throwing a fit, I don't necessarily just like walk in and just spank him, so he stops throwing a fit, which is just really authoritarian. I'm going to force you into the behavior I want. But I'm going to pause and see why he's throwing a fit. And then I'm going to make some educated decisions from there, right? If he's throwing a fit because he's tired and grumpy and he has a poopy diaper, I'm going to change his diaper. I'm going to let him know that we don't behave that way. And he's going to go ahead and take a nap. And I'm going to do that with my own levels of patience and kindness, ideally, right? And I think to some extent, that's kind of how I'm understanding gentle parenting from a high level.
Yeah.
Am I on track?
That sounds accurate to me. Yes.
Okay. I'm glad we're experts here. So
yeah, we made it.
And I think if somebody's just listening to us talking, they'd be like, well, what's the problem?
Right.
So why is this? Why did this become an article on the Gospel Coalition? Why was this a hot button topic? I'm sure. In my quick searching online to try to find more information, especially Christian, kind of sources, lots of sermon series. Is this biblical? Is that biblical? That kind of thing. And so I guess I'd ask you, Nick, what do you perceive as the controversy around gentle parenting?
Yeah. So I think the article is pretty straightforward about the problems that it sees with gentle parenting as a model being biblical or unbiblical. The two things that jumped out at me is it said the two problems are, one, it says that gentle parenting is based on the idea that kids are good and not born sinners. And it's based on the idea that you don't punish. And the article says biblical parenting, whatever that means, requires punishment for basically your kid's discipleship and sanctification. And even goes as far as saying punishment that causes, I don't remember if it used the word hurt or harm or, but punishment that causes the child to be displeased. Yeah.
And I want to give credit where credit is due. I really appreciate, I remember when I was first reading that point about punishment, I knew we were going to get into Greek semantics very quickly, and it did get to Greek semantics very quickly, but they did their research. They ensured that the Greek word that's often translated sometimes discipline, sometimes punishment, kind of has the meaning that they're trying to give. So kudos, right? I think they raised two good points, and these are the points that I like to talk about. And the first, we'll just hone on that one. The argument that the article makes is that gentle parenting is not biblical parenting. And it's not biblical parenting because it assumes that children are inherently good, but instead we need to assume that children are inherently sinful. And I guess I'll just throw out my own hot take, Nick, and then I'd love to hear what you think. I just think that's not really helpful. And the reason I say that is, for the record, I theologically agree 100% that every one of my 4 amazing kids were born a sinner and with a sin nature, and that Christ's death on the cross, his burial and resurrection is the only, in their belief and their following of Jesus is the only path to right relationship with God. We're not going to get into it tonight, but there's a great different perspectives on whether or not children are covered by kind of grace during a certain period until they have levels of autonomy. But I personally, do believe that we're all born sinners. So I don't actually have a problem with that. I have a problem with not meeting people in an industry at their level and what they mean, right? So like when a child behavioral scientist says children are fundamentally good, they are not taking a theological stance.
Right.
They're making a behavioral science stance, which means that they don't define good as without sin. My kids are crying. They're being
apropos.
Sinful. Sorry.
Yeah, right.
Darn sin natures. They aren't making a case that they are without sin in right relationship with God. Like, they're just not using the term that way. And so we're really just confusing semantics, and we're doing this thing that Christians often do. And instead of entering into a realm and saying, I'm going to speak in your language and I'm going to understand you where you're at, instead, I'm going to take where I see the failings of your language, and then I'm just going to call it not biblical. And I just don't think it actually gets us anywhere. Like, it doesn't accomplish anything. And I don't think it's ultimately incredibly helpful.
Right. Yeah. I think it's a straw man of gentle parenting. I think it used exactly one quote from one book to display how gentle parenting universally believes that children are good. And so I think it's a little bit of a straw man in that way. I don't think every gentle parenting researcher or advocate would say children don't have any bad qualities. They are naturally good, and we just have to call the good out of them. I think we can admit that there are some flawed things that need to be shaped and honed by parents who have a little bit more life experience. I do have some theological qualms about the way that he put it. I fully agree with Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Both of my kids are sinners. They both make mistakes. They both have done things that hurt other people and all of those things. But I think the way that this article spoke about it implies that Genesis 1 says God created man and woman, and he said it was very bad, right? Like before we are anything else, we are the image of God. And yes, we sin. Yes, we have flaws. We don't live out our calling. We are, in a sense, we're the masterpieces that have stains on them, right? But we're still the created masterpieces of God. And so to say, I'm not saying that humans are inherently good. I also would not say that they are inherently bad. I would say that humans are created to be inherently good, and we have failed to accomplish that. But I wouldn't say that means that a child is born like a carrier of evil and needs to have that evil punished out of them. I think that's too harsh of a way to understand the Bible. And I think
it does not work, and that is not what Jesus did.
Exactly right. And
what I mean?
If we use Jesus as our model, Jesus you lifts up kids as the example for adults to follow.
Yes.
It's exactly the opposite take that this article has.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's fascinating to me that he doesn't, in fact, the way he uses Jesus is by using the example of Pilate to say, look, this word means punishment because it's what Pilate did to Jesus. Other than that, Jesus barely appears in the article. So and I'm curious about a posture that presents itself as Christian, but doesn't really lean on Jesus.
And I do, to be fair, right? Like, I do think they're trying to say, like, if Christian families follow this, and I want to be really clear, not this academic framework, not this scholarly work, but if they follow this social media trend, I do think it could lead down paths that are not helpful and lead closer to permissive parenting, in which you think that a child contains the wisdom needed to lead their life and that you are not called to shepherd your child. And I think that's maybe where the author kind of like ultimately wants to go in that. I agree with you. I think that oftentimes it is building up a straw man case, and then it's not really communicating well. And it ultimately does get to semantics, kind of to the example is the second point, right, was, gentle parenting says we don't punish, but biblically we know what we need to punish. And we're really getting into semantics, even though we did this author did a good job delving into the Greek. We're still crossing centuries, geographical locations, cultures, and what the word punish means today may not have the same connotations then. I'd reference anybody listening to this back to our Becky Castle Miller conversation 9 months ago.
Absolutely.
I'm not supposed to name dates. I'm sorry, everybody. But in the past, at some point in the past, we interviewed Becky Castle Miller and kind of talking about this idea that it's incredibly difficult to really translate a word accurately from one language to another. And so we have to have some level of grace. There is a clear understanding that parents need to provide corrective behaviors to their children to begin to the best of their ability, model for children what it means to follow Jesus and live a life that is good and loving to others. And as we're doing that, we need to make sure we don't fall into sin as well. And I do think that there is a trend in some more authoritarian parenting of falling into the sin of anger and physical abuse through the justification of punishment. That doesn't mean whether we call it punishment or discipline. I don't actually think it really matters. Although I do understand the theological hairs that could be spliced there. I just don't think splicing those hairs are relevant to parenting. We just have to make sure that no matter what kind of discipline and or punishment we're providing, we are demonstrating the fruit of the Spirit the entire time. That means all through discipline or punishment, whatever you want to call it. We are patient. We are gentle. We are, this is like a test. What are all the fruit of the Spirit? I'm the worst memorizer ever. I just Google everything.
You just have to learn the song. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control.
Wait, are you back now? Because you just cut out for a second.
Oh, sorry.
Did you sing the song? Did I miss the whole song?
Yeah. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control.
I'm really impressed.
I actually didn't learn that song as a kid. I learned it because of my kids.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So no matter how we approach discipline and parenting, and I do think there's legitimate arguments to be made whether or not we use physical discipline like spanking or we use other disciplinary methods. At the end of the day is parents can't punt on their responsibility to engage in the conflict that comes with parenting, to help curb and correct children's behavior to be more like Christ. And while we're doing that, we need to model the fruit of the Spirit. And honestly, I think that if you model the fruit of the Spirit while disciplining your children, people are going to look at it and be like, I think they're doing gentle parenting.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, right. I mean, gentleness is quite literally one of the fruits of the Spirit, right?
It really is.
Yeah, I do want to make one comment that confused me about the article in terms of the way he delved into the Greek, because he makes this whole case that I don't know how to pronounce it, but the word for punishment, paideia, something along those lines. He makes this whole case that this is why it means punishment and even physical punishment. And he uses the example of Isaiah 53, which is the suffering servant poem about Jesus suffering for our iniquities. He uses the example of Pilate, how Pilate says, I'm going to have you punished, and uses this word. And so he's basically saying this word means punishment. Then later in the same article, he starts talking about how this word combines the nuances of training, instruction, and firm guidance with those of reproof, correction, and punishment. So later in the article, after he's done saying this is why it means this, this, and this when it's talking about punishing your kids, later he says, actually, it can also mean these things, but we can't just get rid of punishment as part of it. And so I was confused at how he was so confidently willing to say it definitely means punishment when I want it to mean punishment, even though it can have these other meanings at other times. So I actually don't think he delved into the Greek quite enough and looked at it. Felt like he was using proof texts that kind of were proving his point, and then using the language to prove his point. It felt eisegetical to me versus exegetical, where it didn't dive into the context of a passage or look at the cultural background of a passage. It just kind of said, here's these words and I want it to mean punishment in this case, so it's going to mean punishment in this case.
Yeah, I do hear what you're saying. I think I give a little bit more, maybe I'm just a little more lenient in a blog. I'm like, you did the work. Honestly, it may, and I'm probably applying some of my own past history onto this, but I wonder if this person has some shared experiences. So when me and my wife were pregnant with Luke, or we had just had Luke, I don't remember, he was young. We took a parenting class at church, which I'm really grateful. Maybe not everything we still utilize as far as like how we approach parenting, but it really got us started in a direction of being thoughtful about being a parent, which was really beautiful. And one of the things that was so crucial to this particular couple's way of teaching parenting was you don't punish your children, you discipline your children. Punishment was taken on the cross and it's done, but we discipline. And, I almost felt like reading this article, maybe this individual had similar experiences, heard similar ways of thinking, and it was almost like in response to that. But as I'm getting older, I think I'm getting further away from like theologically roundabout conversations around certain terms and things. I am really interested in them, and they are oftentimes personally rewarding just for my own growth. But 9 times out of 10, they don't get to the root of what needs to happen, right? Like whether you call it discipline or punishment, whether or not you've proved to me that we punish or don't punish, it's really irrelevant to when my 4-year-old is throwing a fit, or when, and this is not a joke, when my 4-year-old is like, drop kicking his brother. Like, how do I teach love and kindness? It doesn't matter if I call it discipline or punishment, right? Like I still have to engage with some really difficult, complicated elements of parenting, So over the years, me and my wife have often opted to, discipline through light spanking. And we have some really strict rules around that. Like we each have to be emotionally calm and patient. Like we have, which is some of the things we learned from that class. But over the years, we've gotten away from that because I'm like, man, do I spank a kid for hitting his brother? That seems not great. But what I'm saying? Like these are the really difficult things. It doesn't actually matter if you call it punishment or discipline. Like that's really irrelevant to the whole conversation. The real conversation is, how do I teach my 4-year-old, my 3-year-old, whatever y'all have, 2-year-old, 1-year, a 15-year-old, a 9-year-old? Like, how do you engage in life with these kids to make them more like Jesus? And I do think that when you're looking at secular parenting methodologies from an academic perspective, not a social media lens, I think generally speaking, people take social media trends, adopt them, butcher them, and then people get the wrong impression. But if you did an academic study on gentle parenting, I'm sure you would walk away with a lot of really helpful tips on how to navigate the difficulties and complexities of raising children. Because I was watching an interview with one of the lead researchers on the original book, and she was talking about how parents who implement gentle parenting need to be, and this is where people usually fail, they need to be really aware of children's developmental stages and understanding where they're at.
Right.
Because you adapt your parenting based on the behavioral and developmental needs of your child, right? So it's that like parenting your, I just think about my kids. So I parent my 18-month-old different than my 4-year-old, different than my 6-year-old, different than my 9-year-old a little bit. But to do that, you have to be really aware of your children, really in tune with your kids, really conscious of their developmental levels, where they're at, in literally informing neural pathways in their brains as they're developing habits, and being really conscious of your own emotional state and whether or not you are in a place to be patient and to, sometimes I just give my kids the cookie. I'm not kidding, because I'm not in an emotional state to discipline or to handle it. And I'm going to teach them poor behavior if I try to engage in that because I'm just not, it was a bad day at work, it was this or that. And I've just realized, you know what? It's better just to, you have a cookie, I have a cookie. Let's go sit on that couch and eat a cookie because
absolutely,
I'm about to lose my crap. So this is a much better way that our night can go than me and you fighting in the kitchen over a cookie, And
right.
I think there's wisdom in that, and being aware of yourself, aware of your kids, and adapting your parenting style to that, which seems to be the crux of gentle parenting. I just disagree with the article. I don't think the crux of gentle parenting is that kids are inherently good. I don't think the crux of gentle parenting is that there's no consequences. I think that might be the crux of a lot of TikTokers. Fine. And that does need to be addressed, because I know that ironically we live in a time in which, just a parent with the selfie mode on their phone can somehow be more influential than individuals who spent 30 years researching something, which is just asinine. But it is the world we live in. And so
it is what it is. Yeah.
I could see the importance of an article addressing some of those points.
Yeah.
Which, can I quickly tangent?
Yes.
We can delete this if needed. Oh my gosh. Me and my wife's also not really on social media. And so we were like, she was sitting down as I was like watching some of these like TikTok junk on gentle parenting. And I was like, who on earth has their phone in selfie mode while talking to their kid? Like, that's not gentle. That's dumb parenting. That's stupid parenting.
Right.
And I hold a very strong position of put your phone down, and your kids are not social media content. So
absolutely,
I'm very annoyed with that. And so I'm sure,
yeah,
I don't
that's
know
a good
if
tangent.
So they were like, watch me gentle parent. I'm like, no, don't use your kid to get likes on social media. How about I'm watching a narcissist parent?
There you go. Maybe act it out again later, but just show your own face,
Yeah, or something.
Here's what happened earlier. Yeah.
Yes, right. Maybe get a spouse or a loved one to reenact it and be funny. And but no, it's just not worth the social media content.
For sure.
It is. Yeah, I'm very much against that. Okay, that's my tangent. Sorry, I was exposed to that online for the first time.
Like, I gotcha.
Why is this a thing?
I agree with you. So I think going back to pre-tangent, I think this conversation is actually a really, really good example of why we thought it was important to start this podcast in the first place. Because I think the article is really just based on this assumption that this is just what we do. It just is what it is. And it spends no time thinking about how are my children formed by this. And so your example of spanking is perfect. Like, how is a kid formed by me hitting them to tell them don't hit? Right. And if you just think, well, they did something bad, so they need to receive punishment. Like, yeah, that makes sense. But then you have to go one step deeper and actually ask, but what is the kid actually learning? I shouldn't do that because then something bad is going to happen to me. Or are they learning when I'm mad, it's okay to hit because my dad did it to me. Right. Yeah. We have to be constantly cognizant of and this is what goes into the developmental stuff, and especially for children, like you said, as their neural pathways are forming so much faster than ours are. Ours are set in stone so much more than, they're not, but they're still very plastic, but they are so much more set in stone than our children's. And so this crucial time of formation and discipleship for them, I love your example with the cookie, and because you have two choices in that moment. You can say, I either want them to learn the lesson that you don't always get what you want, which is a crucial lesson to teach our kids.
Yes, for
sure. But teaching that lesson with my dad is a real jerk when he doesn't get what he wants. Again, how is this forming them?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Whereas you can kind of push that lesson on to half an hour later when they ask for something else, and you're in a better headspace to say, I'm ready to say no to this one. And that's not to say, like, you have to be in the perfect place before you can say no, because when you're a parent of especially small children or maybe teenage children that are in a rebellious stage or something like that, you're almost never in a perfect, like regulated spot to say no and like be calm. And it takes work on our part too. We have to be discipling ourselves and forming ourselves and trusting the Spirit's transformational work in our lives in order to get us to a place where we can make wise decisions about, okay, I'm good to say no to the cookie right now, and I'm ready to just calmly really hold my ground on that right now, and I'm not going to lose it on my kid. I'm in a good spot for that. But I think that takes wisdom to know, and it's not just this black and white. It's this like having to be in tune with the Spirit, having to listen to God's guidance, having to pay attention to your own body and interoception that Becky Castle Miller taught us about, your own body's cues and signals and emotions and things that are happening within you. If you're feeling your heart beating fast or something, and you're feeling like anger rise up in you, maybe that's a time to step away, or ask your spouse to step in, or give the kid the cookie because it's actually not that big of a deal. But I think wisdom is key here, that there's no one size fits all approach. There's no, this works every time. And really that's a big part of what I would say we need to advocate against, is thinking of kids as kind of this like, factory production line, put in A and get out B. I think we need to have wisdom and treat them as human beings and understand that different situations call for different responses.
I'll add to that. And I'll say, yes. And I think no matter where you fall on your particular parenting, like ideologies or whatever, I think that the older I'm getting, the more I'm learning, being humble and just knowing you don't know. There is nobody who knows how to parent well all the time. Like,
for sure.
Kids are as complicated as adults. They really are. And they're better than adults, I think. I think they're definitely closer to goodness than me.
We have so much to learn.
We do. But humble, like, me and my wife talk about this a lot. Like, I don't know. We just have so many moments where me and my wife look at each other and we're like, I just don't know. And so many people in our community say, you all are amazing parents. You're great parents. You're such good parents. And maybe that's true. I pray that's true. But if we are, it's because we go into it saying, I don't really know.
Yeah.
Like that, whether you think that this is the right parenting method, I think if you get into a point where you're like, this is the right way, you're wrong at some point, right? Maybe you're right sometimes, but you're also going to be wrong sometimes. And humility in parenting, I think, is, and that doesn't mean lacking confidence, but just being humble to say, like, there's a lot I don't know about my child. There's a lot I don't know about how to handle the situation. There's a lot of complexities that come with this. And, when certain things happen in life, how do I tell my child this? How do I tell my child that? What kind of conversations do I have with them? What kind of conversations do I not? Me and my wife have chosen some of the hardest, I think, paths to parenting. We think the best, but we don't lie to our kids ever. Like we don't, and we've talked about maybe things that are more silly, like not, believing in Santa, but it's deeper than that. Like where do kids come from? I'm not lying, And so how do you navigate that conversation? Someone passes away and there's really difficult circumstances around that. I don't lie about things, I try to navigate those. Those are hard times, and they're times that should humble me and bring me to a place of saying, I don't know. And I think that is maybe the core tenet of parenting, to just say, like, I don't have the wisdom the Father does.
Yeah.
And parenting should draw me into both a deep submission to the Father and saying, like, God, I don't know. I need your help. Like, this is really hard. And that brings me to a willingness to learn, a willingness to change, a willingness to adopt new styles. And this is maybe where I'm going to poke at this article, but poke at others as well, probably on social media, and stop the criticism. Like, and I say this self-aware that I have thrown some criticism in this podcast, but also don't record your freaking kids on social media. And what I mean by stop the criticism is don't like immediately hear somebody and just think that their way is wrong. Become curious as to why people think what they think, why they parent the way they parent. And, doesn't mean we can't have some firm lines. I have a firm one that children are not social media content to be used and abused for your own advantage. But that's just me. Sorry. It really ticked me off, Nick. Like, it really did.
Yeah. Valid.
No, I just think humility in that level of just, I don't know. I think it's often missing too from the social media space.
Absolutely. I think that's a great addition. And pivoting just a little bit, I think a lot of the article addressed, we've been talking about punishment and discipline, but a lot of the article put it in the lens of sanctification, and basically saying sanctification comes through, when it comes to children, sanctification comes through punishing darkness out of them, was the basic understanding that I had. So I wanted to get your thoughts on kind of that idea. What do you think in terms of sanctification and discipleship for our children, that it requires? He said, I forget his exact quote, but it was something, he said something along the lines of discipling our children will require retributory punishment. So what are your thoughts on that line of thinking?
I don't know. So, and this is like a semantics thing, I think. I don't know if I would word it that way. I do agree that, is it Paul who writes, the father disciplines those he loves? Mm-hmm. Don't spurn the rod, the father disciplines those he loves. I do believe that as a part of parenting, and the way Phil words it is, I'm going to apply corrective behaviors, which is just my way of saying that I have a whole realm of choices, but I am going to cause some form of discomfort, potentially pain, usually not physical, like it's just discomfort, to my child to help correct behavior. I'll give an example when, and we try to match it to the thing. So for us, one time when one of my sons was pretty, young, I think 2.5, 3, something like that, we just noticed like some violent behaviors. His older brothers were playing with swords and Nerf guns and stuff. And so we were seeing that without like the boundaries that his brothers understood, and that kind of culminated into this like kind of terrible moment where like he just maliciously killed a butterfly. And it was like really sad and really revealing. And so me and my wife took a step back, and we needed to apply corrective behaviors, discipline. And so there was momentary discipline, but then there was, we took all weapon-like things away from all the kids. That was applied to the whole household. No swords, no Nerf guns, none of that. And then my son had to raise caterpillars into butterflies. And so this is my wife's idea. She's brilliant. And so, got one of those caterpillar kits, and which if you've never seen, it's like this box. It's like a netted box. So it's like this kind of cube that's all netting. And, it comes with these little caterpillars. And then you got to feed them, and they turn into a chrysalis, and then they grow into butterflies, and then he had to go set the butterflies free. And so this takes weeks, you know what I mean? Like, and he's like 3, whatever.
Yeah. It's so actually harder on you guys than on him, but
maybe.
but what is it doing?
We were focused in on who he was becoming and what discipline did we need to enact. So he wasn't going to be able to play with any of those old types of toys that he got to play with, that he loved playing with. None of them, until those caterpillars became butterflies and he set them free.
Yeah.
And, not to indicate that like that could replace the life of the, whatever, but it just to say like, we knew that he needed to start understanding the value of life. Yeah. And we were going to do it in this way. And again, credit to my wife. It was really brilliant. And it was huge. It was so formative to him, Nick. Like, right. This kid, he still struggles with some of those behaviors. That's sin nature, that I would agree with. But we also see gentleness in him in a way that's didn't exist before. So I do agree. I do believe that discipline must exist. I really do believe must, for all of us to become sanctified. I do believe God disciplines us. I think it's something we don't talk about in the church. I think that sometimes things that are not pleasant happen in my life because the Lord is correcting my sinful behavior and putting me through experiences to purge me of that. And he knows that I want him more than these things. And so he's willing to allow that, depending on the situation, allow that or cause that discomfort or discipline in order to make me more like the kingdom to come while I'm here on this earth. And that's a good thing. That's a beautiful trade. and I'll take it. And so I've got to try to do that. So that's kind of my hot take. What are your thoughts?
Yeah,
I think very long take. It's really long.
I thought it was a really great example, and I think it was a good example of how I would say the father disciplines, so to speak, because in my experience, I shouldn't say in my experience, in my reading of the scriptures, the active God as active punisher is actually a lot more rare than you probably think it is. God almost always, when he says, I'm going to bring you into punishment or whatever, which those passages are, he vows to bring punishment on people all the time. But then almost every time, what actually happens is he hands them over to either natural consequences or removes his hand of protection, and an invading army comes in, or it's almost never actually God that actively punishes anyone. And so I think your example of you want to match up the discipline to the action. So it's not just, hey, you did a bad thing, so I'm going to hit you so you learn your lesson. Or you did a bad thing, so you're grounded. Or you did a bad thing, so you don't get to have dessert. Things that, like, your kids are like, what? I don't understand how hitting my brother has anything to do with cheesecake, right?
Sure.
Whereas, you killed a butterfly, so you're going to raise a butterfly, and you're not going to be able to use the weapon that you used on the butterfly. That's kind of handing them over to the natural consequences. It's a related punishment. And so I think you're absolutely right that punishment is necessary in that sense. But I think the word retributory is, candidly awful. I think that is the exact opposite of a godly posture, that I need retribution against my children to teach them how to be godly. Absolutely not. I could not disagree more with that choice of retribution.
I might fight you on this one.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Retribution was a movie. Okay, definition. Punishment imposed as on a convicted criminal for purposes of repayment or revenge of a wrong committed.
In my eyes, that is exactly the opposite of what Jesus models for us by dying on the cross. He was the innocent one. He was the one that was sinned against, but he doesn't retribute. Is that right? He doesn't seek any vengeance. There's none of that. All he does is take the punishment unjustly, right? And then God vindicates him in righteousness by raising him again. And I think to say, I now, in following Jesus, ought to bring retribution on my children for their wrongs. I think that is a posture of vengeance, and it's not Christ-like. And I think there's a world of difference between paying your children back for something versus helping them to see the natural consequences of their actions so that they learn to become whole humans who don't harm butterflies or people.
Yes. And I think that's where I can definitely find agreement with you. I think there's like a really complicated conversation around that. Jesus also tells plenty of parables that absolutely include the father seeking retribution. Gosh, how many references to this place that people are sent where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth?
Sure, but even there, that's God rescuing the broken and oppressed and those who have been harmed from those who have brought harmed upon them. It's not so much God is paying them back or giving them vengeance. It's more causing them to sit with the wages of their actions.
I don't know. I think the language of the Bible, although I do agree with you, I think it's a yes and. I think it's both. I think it's both God rescuing, and when God says vengeance is mine, he means he's going to take vengeance. And when Jesus says he's going to come and judge, and that judgment is going to include the punishment of those who are not under the blood of Christ, I think that's punishment. I want to be careful to not dilute passages and acknowledge that there's a larger conversation there. But I do think that as we seek to model the Father, this is rarely where we ever need to be. Rare. I think 99.999% of the time, parenting really is being in tune with your kid, understanding where they're at, being in tune with your own emotions, understanding where they're at, when you need to discipline, you do it in a way that closely aligns to what the child did, with the goal, as we talked about, of who they're becoming. You keep that in mind. The goal is who they're becoming. That's what I'm keeping in mind. And I don't think we need to worry about making it right in the sense of paying it back, right? Like, punishing them until things are made right. I do think that when God says vengeance is mine, it's even over our children. That if there's vengeance that needs to be taken, retribution that needs to be taken, that is something the Lord will do. And I'm praying it never happens. That, and what I mean by that is, when I pray over my children every night, I pray that God would forgive them for their sins. And I think of Job, who offered sacrifices for his children's sins all the time, and God called him righteous. And so I'm just trying to take that on and be like, look, I don't know what it looks like. I have a flimsy theological framework for this, but I'm doing it anyways, because I love my children, and I don't want them to fall under the wrath of God, but under the grace of the work of the Son. And so I think, I don't know, I'm still kind of hesitant about getting caught up in the words, because I think there could be a good defense for that language. I just don't think it's helpful language. I think the most helpful application, based language is model the fruit of the Spirit, even when you're engaging in discipline.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think a couple of things there is, first off, the verse that you're referencing where it says that God will.
Did I take it out of context?
Have vengeance.
No,
you didn't. But
that's good.
But it says, do not repay evil for evil, for vengeance is the Lord's. So overcome evil with good. So it straight up says, don't I don't know if retribute is right, just because retribution, but don't use retribution, because God's got you. So don't have vengeance. Don't pay them back. Second, I think even if we are starting from the place of saying God will be the final judge and God will have vengeance, which there is an argument for that for sure. That is a final judgment. It's not a discipleship plan. And so vengeance is not a way to shape people for the future.
Yes.
In that case, vengeance is the final judgment. It's the end plan.
Yeah, that's a very valid
and so
point.
Vengeance is not a tool for child rearing. Vengeance is not a strategy for discipling our kids to look like Jesus, who gave his life on the cross for others who were treating him unjustly. And so I think, I don't think.
Is this why Jesus says in John 3, I have not come to judge the world, but to save it? And it's kind of like, this is for this coming. It's not to bring judgments. It's to create disciples. And then the second judgment is to, I don't know why that
makes sense
in this moment.
Yeah. I've never thought of it that way either. That's cool. Yeah. But I think our posture towards our children ought to be one of shaping them for their future. And just going back to your butterfly example, like how would your kid have learned that lesson better? By you saying, hey, that was wrong, you're grounded.
Yeah.
Or like, he will probably, even though he was so young when it happened, he will probably remember that for his entire life. And if not, his older brothers definitely will. It's a memorable shaping them into whole humans who are learning lessons. And it's not really about that one butterfly. Like, that one butterfly is not that big of a deal, right? But it's about shaping them to learn the lesson of, we don't need to be unnecessarily violent. We don't need to be gruesome. We don't need to kill what God has created. Those lessons are valuable. And if we are parenting from a posture of, how can I lead my children to becoming whole, beautiful, Christ-following, Spirit-filled human beings made in the image of God to reflect God's love and beauty and justice to the world, that's a very different posture from, my kid was born flawed and broken, and I need to punish that out of them. I just think the first one is such a more Christ-like posture to take towards our children.
It's so funny. I still think that parenting falls into the really broad category of, it's not complicated. It's just really hard.
It's really hard.
It's really hard, but it's really not complicated. Yeah. Like, you parent in a way that should be really synonymous with how you show up to your biblical community, with love.
Yeah.
And in any facet of your life. Good parents aren't people who figured out parenting strategy. Good parents are just people who are modeling. They're just following Jesus in every area of their life with integrity.
They learned how to treat people well, and they think of their kids as people.
Yeah. That's the theme of our episode.
Yeah.
Just treat your kids like people and treat people the way God wants you to treat people. And you'll probably be all right.
Exactly.
Like you may not nail every behavioral science thing, and you'll probably screw up along the way, but your kids will grow up knowing that they were loved as a person by somebody who loved Jesus. And that really will probably just be enough.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Not complicated. It just is so hard. You will have to die to yourself every day.
Yes.
This is why I have bags under my
complicated.
eyes. You see it?
Yeah. Amen to that. Amen.
And a bunch of gray hairs growing under this hat.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look, I do think people should check out the article. It's in the show notes below. It really is a good read. And I want to give a shout out to the author, who maybe we disagree with on some points, but I really think did their best to not just confront, the gentle parenting framework, but really a lot of the social media stuff that's probably tied into that. And so check it out. Let us know your thoughts on the article as well in the comments on YouTube, or by sending us a note on our website or through social media. If you have a question that you want to ask, you want me and Nick to talk about, an article or video or social media post or something that you want us to address on the podcast, just send it our way. You can do that on any of our social media platforms, or just going to our website, thelivingroomdisciple.com, and hitting contact us. And on that note, actually, thank you all for tuning in to this episode of the Living Room Disciple podcast with me and Nick. And huge shout out to Anna for sending in the question. Thank you so much for that. Also, thank you so much, Micah, for all the amazing production work, to Eric for getting this episode out to the world, and to Daniel Ramirez for the composition of this episode's music. And thank you to all of you for being with us and supporting us. Find out more on livingroomdisciple.com if you want to check out our Patreon or anything along those lines. Y'all are amazing. Be blessed. And thank you for listening to the Living Room Disciple podcast, where discipleship finds a home.